The July 28th, 2025 MSD of Wayne Township Board of Education working session is called to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for.
Let's, excuse me for a second, I forgot to grab an agenda. Oh. Do we have anyone sign up for public comment this evening?
We did not.
Thank you. Moving into new business, human resources, Dr. Suggs.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. You received in your board docs A3. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about the A3. Respectfully ask approval of human resources report A.
I move for approval of Human Resources Report A3. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any comment or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Human Resources Report A3 is approved. Thank you, Dr. Suggs.
Thank you. And as you just proved that report, I'd ask Casey States to join Dr. Butts as I read important information about Casey. The States began her career in Wayne Township as a special education teacher at Chapel Glen in 2010. She has also served as a special education teacher at Bridgeport Elementary and Maplewood Elementary. In 2023, she became the assistant principal at the Wayne Township Preschool. The States has served as the School Improvement Committee Chair and led district professional development in the areas of the Wayne Hub and Google Drive. She has been recognized as a Dare to Dream educator. She has managed and sustained high enrollment levels for preschool and child care classrooms, improved and implemented onboarding practices to ensure compliance with licensing and accreditation requirements, and established professional learning communities to support the growth and development of preschool educators. The States earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in elementary education and special education at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. She completed her master's degree in business administration and her administrative license from Indiana University. I present to you tonight the principal of the preschool, Casey State.
Casey, you brought several people with you. I'm sure that you would like to introduce.
My husband, daughter-in-law, and my mom are on the front row. And then in the back row, we have three wonderful preschool teachers. A friend from Bridgeport, and Mrs. Caulfield, who lives in.
Thank you all for being here, being so supportive. Congratulations. I know that the journey was intense. Phenomenal job, of course. Very excited to see your leadership in preschool and see who you choose, your assistant. You start going through that process. I think you have something you want to say to the board.
Roman and school board, I just want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I'm very excited to lead our youngest friends as they start their journey through education.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we have 15 board policies to go through tonight, right? And a budget presentation. You are certainly welcome to stay in the open meeting, but we also understand if you want to go south. So thank you for being here.
Okay, moving on to safety plans presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the board, at your seat, you will find two example safety plans, and we'll go through just a few components of those here in a moment, but I wanted to just give a quick rundown also. It's been a pretty eventful year with the safety and MSD Wayne Police Department, as we are not quite to the 2-year mark of that department existing, going back to September of 2023, would have been when that well, to the action to create that department. So over the last, a little bit over a year, we had a new Chief Ubershine, who began, brought a lot of experience from INPD and connections in that space with him. We've also turned over about half of our police department and now are on our way to an all tier 1 police department, meaning all of our officers have gone through tier 1 training with the Indiana Police Academy.
Law enforcement go.
Indiana Law Enforcement Academy, thank you.
You're welcome.
Went straight to the movie. Police Academy. I knew that guy make it good. So that has been part of that journey. Behind the scenes, Chief Ubershine has been advocating for our department to get access to IDAS so that they can have all the tools at their disposal to look things up and keep our schools safe. We have individuals that perhaps might pose a threat to our schools. We're able to secure that with the help of Dr. Harvey and his technology team. There's a lot of very specific stipulations for how that network map has to go. And then do some small things to our chief and sergeant's offices that create guarantee of privacy with that critical information across the state. We're able to create a sergeant position so that there is a second in command, and Sergeant Hazelwood is taking over and been a real help. I know Chief Ubershine, whenever we get a chance to talk, he says he's a force multiplier. And I would agree. I've certainly seen them be able to produce probably 3 to 4 times as much as he could on his own, just with all the paperwork and things that exist. A great example of that is it allowed Chief Ubershine to finish about 160 pages of SOPs that now kind of govern and allow our officers to know the correct protocols. And then establish the training and certification cadence and sequence that we have to have for all of our officers now that we have our own department. So, alongside of that, we got a chance to meet with our administrators last week, yes, with Sim, and rolled out a number of new systems that are a large part of keeping our students safe. Have a new camera system thanks to Dr. Harvey and his team, especially Kim Stone, and it is accessible from home. It is a web-based system now, whereas previously we could only access cameras if we were on the school network experience. It was first responders, our officers, our administrators, the ability to track those things, whether they're in the cafeteria, laptop at home, to get a call and check if something was going on. We also launched a new radio system last week. All schools in the district now have radios. The cabinet has heard me say this multiple times, but when I stepped into this role, I did not realize that elementaries did not have radios. And process in a bit, remember from Maplewood, when questioned the principal, why do you use your radio to communicate? And she looked at me like that was crazy and said, we don't have radios. Explain why you don't need radio. So excited about that, baseline that for all of our schools, ensure that they have access, both their colleagues and our resource officers, etc. Launched a new alarm system that is now updated, modern, app we can access and see not only if it is armed or disarmed remotely, but we can see who disarmed it or armed it throughout the time. So it adds a nice layer of safety side of that. Also train all of our administrators in the CSTAG threat assessment protocol so that we now have legal backing to the threat assessments that our administrators do on a pretty frequent basis. And are excited this year to launch what we are calling the elementary liaison officers. William Hogan has been stationed at Sanders, but we've not had an officer who's designated to serve our elementary. So Officer Hogan has a great personality to work with our youngest students, and is now going to be the first call that our elementary principals will make if they have a need. And also will spend time rotating through those buildings at lunches, arrivals, dismissals, until before election. Police department. So all in all, excited about the tools that we are providing to those school leaders, and know that those school leaders remain the most important component of this safety matrix, that their expertise and the resources that they have are really what are going to help us move forward. With that, certainly welcoming questions on those items, and then just a couple items. And largely, we paused, right? So
Standardization of the plans is really going to be critical and key. So obviously Steve brought a couple examples here, but what you'll see in the future as you look through our plans is the consistency that exists, so that our officers, our first responders, all involved know from building to building what procedures will be in place, how things are going to be handled, because they will be very consistent.
So, on the North Wayne plan, I was just gonna bring your attention to pages 8 and 9. And I mentioned how the school leaders are the keys to the school safety matrix, and beyond that, what we have at each school is safe school committees that are now articulated by a code, but are again, even as an administrator in a building, if you don't have that line of communication and that cadence of reviewing things with the practitioners in the classroom, you can lose some things. So they now have that in each building. This is just the example of the individuals that are included in North Wayne's. And then on page 8, you can see some of the items that we've learned for them to ensure they do review and go over as. And then the last part, this is really a repeat slash, just a reminder, our reunification sites. We hope that we are never in a position to utilize those, but on page 37 and 35, 36, and 37, you can see maps of those reunification sites, as well as a list of those.
Dr. Sandel, just as a side note, you could kind of clarify and or remind the board that these really are internal documents because of sensitive information like reunification sites.
That's absolutely correct. Thank you for that reminder. So, yeah, that's the reason that these are paper copies. I'll collect these as we go. We do work hard to keep these plans as confidential as we can. Of course, there's groups of people who need to have them. Our practice then after this evening, there's no board action required. But again, code says that if I present these, then I will take these and upload a PDF of each school's plan into Navigate 360, which is our web-based school safety platform that our first responders have access to, so that they're housed there and then have access to those who have that as a copy. Thank you.
Also in Navigate 360, it's been some time since we've talked about that, but you might recall we have 360-degree views of every classroom in every space of the building. While certain things may change, the permanent features of those rooms don't change. So if there is a threat that is happening in, call it A Hall 204, A204, they can pull that room up, see what the room looks like inside. So before making entry into that room, they know, is there a cabinet here? Is there a wall here? Is there, a doorway here? So they can make that assessment before going in as they're preparing to bring that space. So really great opportunity for first responders as well. One of the things I jokingly said this, but it is true, as we've learned with other situations, we do not have numbers on our roofs, door numbers on our roofs. So that's something that is a future consideration for us, so that aerial responses can know what part of the building they need to be monitoring when they come to the building, because they will not be able to see a door number from up above. So adding that to just another safety precaution for us.
Then the other item I was just going to point you to, and I apologize, on page but just the maps of Chapel Hill and the nursery for Chapel Hill's plan. The map that you will see is of Flinders, that is their meeting. North Lane has Chapel Hill, 31 on the north side of the district there as their. All the considerations, separating students from parents, and views and things like that, so that we know those are emotional charged instances and we can reunify people better and be calm and collected and that way to them. That is all I have on school safety complaints, but again, have any questions that you might have?
Need updates.
What's that?
They need updates.
Oh, my title.
Yeah.
I knew that was one thing I did not check, very quick.
You worked hard for that, but
I think I still live in, yeah.
Parents, what are we communicating with our safety plans to our parents?
No. Other than we have them, that they are being practiced, that, I mean, we will share, if a parent reaches out to us with a specific question, we will do our very best to give them enough information that puts their mind at ease. But we don't know which parents may be engaged in other activities that are trying to create a safety situation in our buildings. And so when an incident occurs, Janine has plans that she has for communication during an incident or following an incident as far as reunification, those types of things. But we won't share where those reunification sites are. We won't share what our procedures are in a specific circumstance that will occur, because then that makes our building less safe and it makes their child less safe.
So meeting location, especially for them. There is not one designated parents to be aware of something. If something does happen, it's usually a meeting location for the parents to.
Yeah, so we have, depending on the building, there are several, because depending on the circumstance of the event, our first reunification site may be compromised. So we may have to have them go to a different site. Again, depending on what that disaster is, a natural disaster, if it's a man-made disaster. It ironically, had a chance, actually twice this week, to have a rich boat out. And I can recall after we had the train derailment over by the library, I don't know if you remember that in 06, 07, something like that, where we had some gases that were being leaked. There was an increased focus on disasters on the west side. And we did a drill that if the Eagle Creek Dam was blown up, what our response would have to be, because it would flood the entire west side of Indianapolis. And so that whole corner of 10th Street and Grove School, 8,000 children, none of those buildings would be able to be used as reunification sites. Matter of fact, we would have to be evacuating as fast as we could to get as far away from those as we could. So those are the types of things that we just don't know if we're going to be using our first or second reunification site, where we're going to advise parents to go. And so to avoid confusion of saying, well, if it's this, you may go here, if it's that, we will tell them in real time, here's where here's where we want parents to meet, here's where the children are, here's how we're going to reunify.
And one can also, and it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't children in harm's way, but probably, I'm gonna say 4 years ago, because it was when my grandson was born. I had to do an evacuation, but it was because we had a water main break and they had shut off all water, so I couldn't keep kids in school. The downside of when parents know too soon is that I had to manage the ton of them that wanted to come up and get their kids, and me trying to get buses in, me trying to load buses, me trying to get to the high school. Then of course, then of course they're angry with me. So now you're cussing at me because I'm telling you, I can't release them. So I can only imagine if it was something where it's a safety concern, what that could look like, because parents go into panic mode. And then in that, all they want is to grab their child, but they don't realize I have 600 kids that I'm responsible for trying to, get to the next location. And I know the headache when that was just the fact that I needed to get us out of our building for sanitary, they couldn't stay there because we had no water. as opposed to if it was truly an emergency and what that would look like. It would be chaos.
Respect. A parent. My grandchild, in Illinois, they already instructed these children back on the way. So she's shown me exactly where she would go, if anything happened, she would go across the street, it's one location. She has to call her parents from there. So they've already instructed these children, that's why I was asking, do we have?
No,
There are so many if-then situations.
One person knows that too.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, I'm coming from. This is what she's told me, first, and I was just wondering.
is it another school that they're using for the reunification site? Or is it a public building, is it a private building?
No, actually, she could just her middle school, if anything was to happen, and they're dismissed. They have designated areas to go to. And so the parents know exactly what area they're going to, if they're informed.
On the campus?
Across the street, it's designated spots off campus.
And do they own those spots, or they've worked out a deal with another private?
They worked out a deal, apparently.
Wow,
She showed me exactly where she was to go. And
okay.
I think that's,
See, my concern with that would be, what if the person is the student or a parent who knows the next spot?
But
That'd be my
again, I'm
concern.
coming from a different.
Yeah,
No, I'm saying even as a parent, I would worry about
She's,
another, the shooter knowing that is, or whatever it is, knowing that other spot
but to
too.
me, I find she knows where to go. She's already showed us exactly where she's gonna be if something must happen. So instead of scatter,
yeah, what,
they don't have a clue.
our children will not leave the building. I
Right.
mean, that's the other issue is. I'd love to talk to that school corporation to figure out why they're sending children out into harm's way. To various locations that they can't monitor. Because that sounds irresponsible to me. Our children will be very well, controlled. We'll have a very secure system in which our children, we will know who's moving from where to where, when they're being moved. They will be with a responsible adult. They will not be out in the middle of the open where additional things can happen. Because we will have them well secured and communicate to the parents. So I'm not sure. I'd love to see maybe the safety plans are published in that district. But I'd love to see more information about what they're thinking about. I worry in some of our cases, our reunification sites are outside. Just because the sheer number, and I worry about those circumstances because I do believe there's some risk there, for sure.
Because this was shooting. So, that's what they.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I remember multiple situations where, you have the fire alarm toll, so kids will run outside where a shooter is waiting on them. And so we're also very suspect, and we do have a bit of a delay with our fire alarms when they're pulled, so that we can actually go and monitor and determine, was it pulled because of a fire, was it pulled to just get people out of the building? Because there have been many circumstances where it was pulled for that specific purpose, as a shooter's waiting behind the hill somewhere in the woods somewhere. So all of this to say, these things scare us, right? We have 16,000 children today and 2,300 employees that we are doing our darndest to keep safe, knowing that there are people out there that are trying to do harm. So more plans we can have in place that are very, very well thought out, prescriptive. To your question, I think too, our administrators know exactly where those reunification sites are. They visited those sites. They have walked through plans with the host individuals who will be accepting our children and our students, so that we know they have the materials that are already there, so that when they do arrive, we can reunify children as quickly as possible. So we've gone through those exercises with our administrators, so that it's not the very first time, if something were to happen, that they're actually on site at that reunification. But as a grandmother, you have every right to be concerned, and should. And should,
Safe.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I was just sharing that when there's, like some emergencies right in the building, we have a reunification location that often are outside, that are right in the building, right by the building, when it is confirmed that it was, maybe a fire in the building. And I don't know, but I wonder, we're using two different terms, the reunification and the evacuation sites, and those are really different. So reunification, if we just have the evacuated building, and then we need that pickup spot, but for some reason, we're not able to go back inside the building, there are close by reunification sites on campus for those types of things. Then there's evacuation sites where we actually need to move off campus because of an emergency, or in your case, campus water. And those, we have multiple different potential areas for that aren't published, aren't known. Yeah, so there are a couple different terms there for different situations.
Clarification. Most understanding.
Okay. We'll move on to the school board policies, first readings, Dr. Suggs.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. We were recently made aware that we needed to take a look at these particular policies because they were touched by recent legislation. And in most cases, they went into effect July 1, so we can make sure we're in compliance. But certainly, we will be held accountable. So it's important that we have these on the books. You'll notice that even some of these policies we just looked at in 23, they were really recent. So it may look like a lot, but I don't believe it will be, but feel free to stop and ask questions, clarifications, as we move through these. The first one we'll take a look at tonight is A 100, non-discrimination and anti-harassment. There's some personal characteristics that's been added, references to gender, separate from sex have been removed based on changes in OCR enforcement. When we had this conversation a little, I guess, late last year, in the spring, a lot has happened since then. A lot of cases with OCR. So our legal team, certainly part of their responsibility is to make sure we're staying safe and legal. And based on recent OCR cases and what has happened, that's the lens in which they've looked at this policy. And so the first thing that they addressed is the removal of the word gender, which seems to be a hot button topic. You'll also notice this language straight from SEA 289, which I'm gonna take just a moment to digest that with the board so we understand what we're adding here. So in accordance with IC 22-9.3, it is unlawful discrimination for a school corporation to take an education or employment action based on race, religion, color, sex, national origin, or ancestry, which is a personal characteristic. Also in accordance with Indiana Code, it is unlawful to require an employee to undergo training that asserts that a person having a specific personal characteristic is inherently superior or inferior to a person having a different characteristic. That a person, by virtue of a person's personal characteristic, should be blamed for actions committed in the past, or that a person's moral character is determined in whole or in part by the person's personal characteristic. And a school corporation employee may not implement any of these theories or compel a student to do so. Any questions? I just want to be clear that we understand what we're being asked to do.
Dr. Sykes, this is the policy that had sexual orientation come through.
Yes.
It's gone now.
I think a little later in the policy, we address that, yes. Not here at the time, but yeah, great question. And so I'm gonna move on to page 5, just, again, they're just cleaning up the language, we left his, her there, they put employee. On page 6, there's nothing there on page 6, just a reference to the link. On page 7, so confirming this still happens, we do an internal investigation. If there's of allegation of discrimination or harassment. We do that simultaneously. And then we deleted this language, was added in response to OCR complaints. Here's what you were asking about. This is Ode Marcotte. In response to OCR complaints under previous federal administration, so unnecessary and potentially legally harmful language under the current federal administration. So we left the little sets. Our interpretation of that can be what we needed to be in order to handle any allegations that would come to our office. Does that make sense? So it doesn't mean someone couldn't complain and say, I believe I've been harassed based on my sexual orientation. Those complaints still would come to our office. Any questions about that? Okay. And then just a minor change on page 8. In the language, 9 and 10 are good, 11 and 12. If this is okay, and then we get to the back and we have the OCR at Chicago, they added that email in the edition of Indiana Code. I might make mention and notice all of the citations. For this board policy, it's tremendous. Any questions about that policy?
I do, just
Yeah.
the very first paragraph,
Mhm.
I thought we had not, I thought we had that we do not discriminate or tolerate harassment on the basis of, including, we still had sexual orientation.
So
It was
review
in there,
there,
but didn't
okay,
change it,
so I will take a look.
yeah, I think you didn't, you probably did not take that out.
Right. Now, I,
It's not in-
right, and I would say in the back, they've suggested that we take it out. But we'll come back certainly, or I'll make that notation to see how it is on the books. See if they inadvertently took it out. Other comments? All right, we'll move on to B 150 school board election. This one's pretty simple. This revises the minimum age for a board member. You now can be 18. Not 21. And here. All right, any questions about the 150 school board election?
Still be a student.
Yeah, I was gonna say that hypothetically could be a senior in high school.
I think we had a case, didn't we, Dr. Buzz, we had a student that served on a board?
Well, I think you just graduated.
Okay,
Danville student, if I recall. Yeah, that's a great question, because an
Yeah.
employee cannot be a board member.
right.
Can an active student be a board member?
It doesn't say anything.
Uh-uh.
It does say current student may not be a member, the very next one.
I would say,
Oh, there it is, okay. An employee of the school district or current active student doesn't- may not
there
be
we
a
go,
member.
okay, may not be.
But an area 31.
They might have leave settlement.
That's true.
Well, unless they're doing some. I guess.
Because it-
Still
Yeah.
people.
They would have to be, in order to be there, they want it has to be. That's not good. But I mean, you know, it's. You know, I was 17 when I graduated from high school, so. I could have run. But
B 200, unexpired term fulfillment, I think we're gonna see this language in a couple of places. It revises the methodology for replacing board vacancies, and it refers to the affiliations that have to be clear, right? So if vacating member stated an affiliation with a major political party, vacancy must be filled by a office under Indiana Code 3-13-11. The person appointed must be from within the boundaries of the district and serve for the term or balance of the term. If the vacating member does not state an affiliation, major political party, then the remaining members of the board shall seek and interview qualified candidates from the community. That's not the language. Questions?
So for clarity, if someone has stated their political affiliation is different.
Okay.
Does that mean whoever feels have to have that same affiliation? Or how does that go?
What is
When
the
you so lose,
caucus?
right, right,
Caucus will be the party,
The party.
Right.
caucus, so it'd be the Marion County Democrats and Marion County
Yeah.
Republicans.
right.
Appoint a Democrat.
They would appoint.
They would appoint.
They would pick.
They
But
would.
if they have no affiliation, then it goes back to the board.
Right.
Right, on the caucus.
That's right, that's what it's called.
Yes, the caucus.
Gotcha.
Oh.
Mm.
That
I'll get clarification, that's certainly how it reads.
Mm-hmm,
So if no affiliation, then you get to choose.
right.
That passes.
Yeah.
Sure did. All right. And so the next one is B 250, revises the timing for the organizational meeting. It gives us a little wiggle room instead of 15 days right there at the beginning of the year you have to make that meeting. Questions about that? All right, C 250, admissions to the district, legal settlement. We are talking about transfer students, but we're using the language of the Indiana code. Here, it looks like a lot. But it's not. It really is reorganized. This whole policy is reorganized to mimic the language of the Indiana code. And we found out this policy has to be readopted annually. So this is one that you'll see every year until we don't. Okay. And so it gives, MSD of Wayne Township will educate tuition-free students at legal settlement. Gives the parameters for children of divorced parents. Also gives parameters for expulsion or withdrawal from other districts and how that student may or may not enroll in our district. On the next page, what happens if a student or parent fails to inform the district of an expulsion? There's some guidelines there. Non-resident students may be accepted into the summer school program provided by the district if they are enrolled in our district. Student residence changes. You have to see policy C 150 for that. Transfer students. Students with legal settlement in the district referred to as transfer students will be enrolled in compliance with Indiana code with the following procedures. It gets really specific and it says the student's parent, one of those procedures says that if the student is a current employee of the transferee school district with an annual salary of at least $8,000. This is really interesting that they give that specific. So they, if they, that means it's just been tested.
coach.
Yes, that's right. Right. And then $3,000 earned due to being included as an employee in the extracurricular portion of the transfer school district. And I will tell you, we have lots of coaches in that 22 to less than $3,000 range. So we might see some of this here in the near future. Okay. The student's parent currently resides in Indiana. The transferee school district has the capacity to accept the student. The number of requests or transfer exceeds the capacity established by the district, reduced by the number of transfers that will be given priority as described in paragraph C. Again, just giving that framework for how you manage the number of students in your buildings and how you accept transfer students. Pursuant to the law, a student's application may be denied if they've been suspended 10 or more school days or expelled for possession of firearms, weapons, destructive devices causing physical injury to a person, violation of the district's drug or alcohol. Those things aren't new, but restated in language in the current Indiana code. Transportation will not be provided. That is currently how we handle that now. On the next page, we strike some language no longer appropriate. We do add the district will respond to student transfer requests primarily for athletic reasons in accordance with Indiana law. as you may or may not know, students can transfer to play sport. They get one opportunity to do that. And pretty much without question, I think you sit out for 30 days and then you're eligible to play. Okay, that's great.
Our first elementary request to transfer because of that's
Elementary vote.
good denial.
There is some new language. Right? There is some new language for residency, of students with military parents, and so that's to protect those parents that are moving around. As long as they can prove legal settlement in the district, of course, we will, enroll according to the law. Any questions? Next, we'll take a look at C 350. This policy is no longer required. Unbelievable. The policies are required. However, we certainly are highly encouraged to keep it. And I don't believe there's a whole lot of changes. We just take out the verbiage in accordance with Indiana law. Not required. And then there are, now remember, according to the law, we don't have to have a policy. But we are held accountable to the law that says we won't bully. So I want to be clear about that. And there are a couple of timelines that have been added. So as soon as we're aware of an allegation of bullying, we have till the end of the next school day after the school becomes aware of the possible incident. So basically 24 hours, and we need to alert. In the paragraph below that, it says not only will we contact the student who may be the victim, but we also will contact the parents of the student, any student that's involved in the situation in that 24-hour period. Okay. Also states that at the conclusion of the investigation, we will have that same 24 hours to let all parties involved know what the conclusion is. Any questions about that policy? C 350 anti-bullying. Any concerns about keeping this policy on the books? Great. C 475, brand new. All this is new language, but basically it says that we must provide religious release time according to statute. And so that's why we're putting this in the policy. And gives some parameters, gives some, can't interrupt the student's regular schedule. There's a form that's also going to be connected to this policy. That's very specific for the parents to sign off on, that says you will be responsible for transportation. And you will make sure that your child doesn't miss, any other classes that will not interfere with their educational career. Here in the policy, it says that an entity that provides religious instruction to a student under this policy must agree to conduct an expanded criminal history check and expanded child protective index check for each of the entities, employees, or contractors likely to have direct ongoing contact with students of the school corporation in the scope of the individual's employment or contract services, and to hold liability insurance coverage for services or transportation provided outside of school property. That was going to be really interesting. As this policy goes into effect.
School responsible for getting that information? Or
Yeah,
parents are?
It reads to me that we're gonna have to make sure that those back, that's why I said this is gonna be really, really interesting.
There are many districts that have already been approached by organizations wanting to do that. And so fortunately, if the time comes for us, we'll have lots of examples to navigate into the work of how other districts are handling.
Yeah, it does read, as I read this again, that they have some culpability in making sure they do background checks as well. The other part of this law says that we may, allow for credit in religious studies. We have not had that kind of request in the past, but certainly we could be bringing this back if that becomes an option. We have to. So this is, if you, I don't know, Liz, Dr. Walters, that we had requests. Sure, it's gonna-
Not recently, the mission trips have come up in the past, but there was, something that could be turned into that. And I think as we get the request to do. What is the equivalent of the credit?
I'm correct, but this is not in the schoolhouse.
No,
This is offered outside the
outside of
schoolhouse,
the schoolhouse.
either walking distance or transporting, utilizing a school bus or whatever vehicles that entity may have.
Mhm. Yeah, it's clear the entity does need to conduct their own background checks.
So a great example is if the Baptist church next to Chapel wanted to do something, gets to walk across. Yeah,
We did that when I was in school. In IPS, we walked across the street.
just walk off the lunch.
Yeah, I did too, elementary.
I did know that, and I paid us.
Why don't you put them on so?
And walk down the street by ourselves.
Ourselves to go home for lunch in elementary school.
And that may.
Long time.
I think it was a nap in the middle there somewhere.
Yeah, it was.
Lunch and a nap.
I had students though, when I first started teaching, they walked home.
Okay. So we'll take a look at C675, student suicide prevention and awareness. This policy also is no longer required. But our legal team certainly finds it prudent that we keep it on the books. And so their only change we took here was consistent with Indiana law, just struck that out. Questions?
Indiana code still listed bottoms or something.
Sure. Yes, there is other code that speaks to what happens if there's a situation. Great. And then C700, yes, we're back. We're talking about attendance, academic engagement, and truancy prevention. So Senate Enrolled Act 482 requires IDOE to establish categories and a framework. And I will tell you, my colleagues have been meeting all last week, I believe, or two, talking about the categories we talked about today, because it's just not enough to be able to say we have the policy, we know what the categories are. What happens is that we then have to look at how we are tracking it, right? What does it look like within the system? Dr. Harvey's team, and so it starts to get big really fast, right? But it is important that here in the school board policy that we reflect the new language. Here in this first paragraph, simply says that the school board believes that a presence in the classroom enables the student to participate in instruction. It just speaks to how important attendance is, right? And then on page 2 is where we start to reflect the new Senate Enroll Act, where we have the categories. And so in D, we have the Armed Forces of the United States, including the reserve components for at least 100, is that right? 150 days in a school year that the student is not an habitual truant. We had to add that language. H, the student is in good academic standing, as determined by the district, up to 6 instructional days of year for school participation in a scheduled competition, exhibition, or event. So it gives FFA or 4-H as examples of that. We had to include what medical, to define what medical is, so we have A, B, C, and D there. We had to include for funeral and bereavement. We had to include religious, And then D, family choice, E, family choice, unplanned. The first one is planned, D is planned, family choice, unplanned, like a deployment, during deployment, or unforeseen family circumstances, and then administrator approved. G speaks to a 504, and basically, our legal team, included this language so that we as a district are consistent. It's to make sure that when we look at absences, we are looking at those plans as well. Exist first. Okay. And then the IEP case conference committee will determine services during these absences in accordance with their protocol. So be very specific about that. H and I are included there just as we just read in another part of the plan. We took out even if the student is beyond grade 6, because we now know it's not just elementary, and that language shows up on the next page, I believe. Page 4. This paragraph is really kind of weird, only because it's good for 1 year. So repeated instances of unexcused absences may result in disciplinary action up to suspension or expulsion of a student, except for, take that out, 2025 and 2026 school year. So there's an exception just for this school year, and we shall not expel or suspend solely for habitual truancy. But I guess we can't ask that, not sure. I'm gonna get more clarification from our legal team. That's the way they said that's how it reads exactly in the legislation. Okay, and then you'll see there in the middle of the page is now reads in grades 6 through 12 that this applies to. And then on page 5, this is some relief. We used to have to hold those attendance conferences, no longer or no more than 5 days, instructional days after the 5th absence. We now have 10 instructional days. So that's going to be really helpful. And then we have some reporting requirements that say that the superintendent or attendance officer having jurisdiction shall report a child who is officially truant from school to the prosecuting attorney.
I think we have one case prosecuted this year. How those are right? They ended up not prosecuting that one.
Yeah, it
That was the Southfield case, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the reality is, and that's one of the things, the prosecutors, they have a lot of really important things to be handling, especially here in Marion County. Student attendance is not one that rises to that level. It's going to divert resources from what they have. So, you know, it's unfortunate we had to legislate this. Secondly, it doesn't take long for people to understand that the prosecutor's not. And so Janine spends about 5 hours a week sending out messages to families to keep them updated on attendance. Talking to our principals, they're spending anywhere from half a day to a full day a week where they are meeting and dealing with things like this, which takes them out of the classroom, which takes them out of really important instructional conversations and things that are critically important. Yes, we're building relationships with some of our families that don't value education or not as much as maybe some others. We're helping to build plans that are getting students to school. We're seeing an increase in attendance, which has been wonderful. But, you know, the question becomes at what cost? And, you know, Ramika's living this every single day, but it's a whole lot of time taken away from being an instructional leader. So.
Especially when you know there's not, I mean, in talking to some principals across the state, they get a little bit of support in smaller areas. Where I was surprised, they said, oh no, they file, they do not like, well, that's not happening in Marion County.
Yeah.
And that never happened in Marion County because there's too many of us and it won't be a priority. And I think year 1, it made a difference. I saw an increase in attendance, but I think that's because parents thought something could happen. As soon as they realized that truly nothing's gonna happen, I think we'll be right back where we were.
Yeah.
Especially, like I said, in Marion County. And it's a headache. It takes an awful a lot of time.
But it's law that the prosecuting attorneys have to just be notified. It
Correct.
doesn't
Yeah.
say that they have to do something about it.
Correct.
Nope.
And the Marion County Prosecutor's Office has met with us, and they've been very clear as to what steps they would need to see from us. Or they would even consider occasionally, it's an expensive amount of documentation, over a long period of time. Before we ever can actually send it to the prosecutor's office.
And I've had some true cases, like when I say a lot of absences, and DCS screens it out.
The case we mentioned just a minute ago was one of the worst we've seen.
Yeah.
So.
All right, C 725, parental access to instructional materials. I will take you to the last page. It includes the requirement that a list of instructional materials on human sexuality must be posted on the school website. So that's that language right there. Next school, that's right. Questions about that? Okay, let's move on to D 275, employment background checks and mandatory reporting. And so it requires us to have a policy upon contacting references. So what the changes you see here, we have been doing, which says we need to contact the previous employer. We need to be thorough. If there are gaps in employment, we need to make sure we're taking and investigating those. Language that was struck out, oh, no, contact applicants' employment references and of applicable, the most recent employer provided by the applicant, or the applicant may be hired. And so that's best practice, that's what we're doing. That has not changed at all. There is some language about IHSAA, so you'll see that several times throughout the document. I'm on the second page, it looks like I need to number. Lengthy. Expanded child, that's, we refer to that as CPI. The Child Protective Index, so expanded child protection. We would need to collect the necessary documents to conduct a pre-employment background investigation, which we do. Just cleaned up the language. That's on page 4. On page 5, this is the language, you see IHSAA throughout, next to the last page. But this paragraph that was added, you see this exact language in a policy we just looked at in reference to the superintendent that says, if something, we find out some information, in a criminal background check, then we would let you know right away within 5 days. Okay? Any questions about that policy? So D 525, we are, it is no longer required. And so we can delete, teacher appreciation grant policy. As you recall, I used to have to bring it every year. And it no longer exists in the way that we have this policy written. It would be a competitive prospect in which we still don't really have, we have some dates, we don't have the framework, we don't have the rubric. We're keeping CTA informed as much as we know, so that they're aware of it. Any questions about them too?
With that, do you know, with the new one, what constitutes mentoring? Is that having a student teacher, or is that having a mentor, like, do we have? I just think about how small that may be if it's only, if you're mentoring a first year teacher or something like that, is
You mean the pool of people who will be
who will get
eligible?
that can go up, because to be able to get the highest, you have to, one of the
I
criteria
think
is
that's
the
purpose.
mentor.
I think that's purpose.
Okay.
Yeah, it really becomes, well, so a couple questions. With this the competitive nature of where tag money currently is, who's determining 20% who are eligible?
Right,
Who's going through portfolios and
right.
data set? we don't know what that process looks like.
Mhm.
We suggested, do we just use our teacher of the year, because they've already been voted on by their colleagues as the best in the building,
Right,
which then changes the teacher of the year process.
right.
Moving forward, when they're up to $7,500 tied to it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I would expect, there are many districts that are talking about not even pursuing this year,
Mhm.
because they just don't like the nature of it. I would expect we will probably see this go away in the next biennium. I think the General Assembly will take that allocation out and disperse it elsewhere. Because it certainly is not doing what they intended for.
Right.
This typically comes at a really convenient time of the year. That's dispersed in November around holiday season.
Yeah.
Correct.
In your opinions, is there a certain percentage of our staff who have come accustomed to counting on that as part of their salaries?
Yes. And this year, the disbursement will not occur until April. So they've already told us the disbursement's gonna come much later. We've broached the conversation with CTA in May when we sat down with them, and began to talk with them. But we have new leadership now, so we'll have that conversation again with current CTA leaders to determine, hopefully work together with them on determining how Wayne Township might handle, because our current evaluation system was not set up to differentiate our teachers for this purpose.
That's gonna be my question too. What changes will go to the evaluation system?
Right. Yeah. And you also have to consider what data sets to utilize to determine who is making the most effective gain.
Right.
Is it only standardized tests?
And then, so the only only 3 through 5, at this point, you eliminate K1, I guess 2, you could say, but you eliminate some because they don't have the data sets,
Secondary teacher of the year is a culinary arts chef.
right?
I'm not sure what data sets he's gonna use to demonstrate the large growth of high school students.
Right.
If he was determined to be our secondary teacher of the year, because of the service he provided to students and staff. And so, yes, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Does that mean that no related arts teacher ever can
They never
qualify?
get it, they never get it.
So,
All right, G175, audio, video, and digital recording on school property and of school meetings. So we can't require or prevent, more importantly, a parent from recording an IEP meeting, or any meeting for that matter. But we thought it important to put in school board policy that the district would request 24-hour. So that we could get better compliance, so that we're aware. And usually what that means is we want to make sure we're reporting too. Okay. And I think that's the only.
probably recently read of a school corporation in the north, that banned a parent from the building. Because they did have a policy that says you can't record, which is interesting because it's law. But she was recording and then posting on social media meetings. So. One of the reasons that we also record is because we want to ensure that the full context of a meeting occurs, not portions of a meeting that may be taken out of context that are lost without previous and post recording.
Or at this
portions of
point, that
recording.
AI has been applied.
Mhm.
G475, data breach and protection. So the district shall notify that the Indiana Office of Technology within 48 hours of any data breach. And I will tell you, these suggestions come to us because of what's happened in other school districts with that experiences. There is some Indiana code right there in the second paragraph. The district will also notify the Indiana Attorney General's office, and if more than 1,000 individuals are impacted by the breach, the district shall disclose to each national consumer reporting agency information necessary to assist in the agency in preventing fraud, including personal information of an Indiana resident affected by the breach of the security of the system. And of course, Dr. Harvey's office would be helping about. Okay, we'll just get that. I know that's. All right, H150, school visitors and parent-family engagement. In accordance with Indiana code, those first 2 paragraphs on page 1 it's 2 pages on page 1, basically speaks to parents' rights. Their right to the information about their child and to be an involved parent, how we'll support that as a school system. What you see after that is, in order to do that, we want to make sure that parents are orderly, that we're not disrupting the school environment. And so we have some guidelines on how parents, will conduct themselves. Visitors must register at the school office and seek permission to see a student or an employee. Participate in an activity or observe. All visits are subject to the approval of the superintendent, building principal or designee. The prohibitions and expectations governing classroom observations are equally applicable to online instruction. Specifically, visitors are reminded that they need to be silent observers, that they must maintain confidence, and I think that, maintained in confidence. So anything you would observe with other people's children in the classroom, and that has to remain confidential. And then, they may not report in those instances when they're visiting. So persons seeking to provide professional services, including observations, are not permitted without the express consent of the superintendent, building principal, or designate. Any questions about that policy? That takes us to the end of our moving for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the 2026 budget presentation, Dr. Sam.
Everybody's anticipated part of the meeting. So we'll go and be as efficient as we can, just to kind of some objectives that we want to accomplish here. Of course, we want to review the budget process, what that looks like. We do it once a year, so it's easy to kind of forget what goes into that, but also take this opportunity to drill down to different components that feed into that from a revenue perspective and an expense perspective, to help continue to paint the picture of where we are at as a district financially and what sort of strategies exist to help us navigate the next 12 to 24 months as we look at how we can kind of align our spending with our revenue. Feel free to stop me as we go. You've seen this slide before. Just a real quick review. We have the Ed Fund, that is state basic grant. We have debt service. We have our operations fund, our referendum fund, and you all have created the Brandon Gate Fund a little bit before my tenure as head of finance and operations began. And so the budget process really is, in a nutshell, for each of these funds, what we have to say is, what do we plan to spend out of these funds? And then what are the revenues we expect to come into? And of course, if we are spending more than is coming in, we have to have a cash balance that can cover that and kind of obviously make sure we have a balanced budget. And of course we do, but that really is the process. Form 1 is us capturing all of our expenses. Form 2, capturing all of our revenues. And then as we go through, we'll talk a bit more, we advertise each of those numbers on Form 3. And then eventually you all are asked to adopt Form 4, that is sent to the state with their approval, and then comes back to us in the form of the 1782 December, those directions.
Dr. Samuel, before you move on to that slide, you're certainly navigating a lot of changes with public education funding mechanisms. Can you just take a quick second to explain to the board debt service and why debt for a school corporation may not necessarily be a negative connotation, why it might be important for us to carry debt from a funding standpoint?
Absolutely. So that debt service fund is really what's going to carry all of our capital investment as a district. And I think really in line with your question and comment there is that represents the large chunk of our debt service appropriation, represents debt that has occurred over the last 19 years, not debt that we are incurring during the 2026 calendar. That makes sense. So we fund debt over 20 years. We work with our underwriters to structure that debt And within any given debt issuance, the amount we're paying off in that particular year really varies. So they are, I was gonna say play, but that is not the right word, strategically allocating how much we are paying in each of those years to give us the best opportunity to continue to fund the things in our district.
I think also to your question, it also allows us to control the rate. So if we can maintain a constant rate for our local taxpayers by determining how much debt we can incur and how much debt we can pay, then that could provide some consistency across our tax base for our taxpayers who, you know, year over year are trying to figure out, now throw AV in there, and that's part of what the readjustment been, is now we are over assessed. We have higher assessed valuation that is raising taxes up for, you know, for the homeowners and business owners. So that adjusting how much debt we can incur and pay off helps us to keep that rate steady for a long period of time.
So in a sense, it's not like credit card debt at your home. The goal would not necessarily be to pay this off as quickly as possible.
And to Dr. Buck's point, we have operating balance in this fund. So state law dictates how much that can be based on when the debt was issued. Pre 2014, it can be up to 50% of those payments. After that, it's 50%. That operating balance ebbs and flows, but does allow us to minimize rate changes or levy changes for our tax. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think you,
Yeah, we've got more on that coming.
yeah, I'm looking at, I didn't get too far ahead of you, Steve, so
No, that's
I'll
okay.
be quiet for a minute.
All right, that's why we're here. And of course, the difference between the authority to spend, the budget process is about our authority to spend. Ability to spend, obviously, is dollars that we have, but in order to have the authority, what we try to do and all districts do is we really are trying to estimate high on our potential expenses so that we would not have to come back to you all and say, hey, we didn't appropriate enough dollars to pay our bills, please appropriate a few more points. Pretty straightforward graph here, but you can see revenue versus enrollment. That enrollment number, you know, bringing us in right at that 15,800 where we have been for 12 months. You know, but you can see, we'll talk more about revenue here as we go through the next slides, but virtually flat, and we'll talk about why that is a little bit higher, but that is a little bit misleading, which is that curriculum materials fund. Those curriculum materials dollars that used to come separate from the basic grant that are now tucked in there with the basic. And so this is the state run, and I will tell you, I could talk to you for an hour about why I think their numbers are a little off in certain places. Ultimately, they get to what I would say is a pretty accurate picture. The way that they get there is just not the way that I would say we will end up getting there in reality. They have our ADM, you know, trending downward. They show our complexity index trending downward, and then they have some things going on with some of the other components within the state grant that may or may not come to fruition. We run this and we look at our exact numbers of students that are going to be in the severe category or moderate category for special ed, or level 1 and 2 versus level 3 and 4 for the MSD grant. We get slightly different numbers, but at the end of the day, that 142,810 is pretty close, I think, where we would go. However, as we indicated, that 2.6% increase there in year one is almost exclusively the curriculum materials. Collected about $2.5 million that we submitted separately in October over the last 2 years from the state for those curriculum materials. Now, those dollars are embedded here. And so to say this is an increase is a little bit missing. This one's a review also. You've seen this a lot. I think without any objections from you all, this will be the last year we include this. It's been a little while since we have had to move things from the general fund to the operations fund or the education fund. But it is a good reminder that there used to be a completely different mechanism to fund all of these things, regarding to state revenue. So here we have the education fund appropriation. So what we have, like 25, that number there is exactly what we advertised on our Form 3 last year. And then that 2026 number is, we're still working through all of this. There's a dance that goes on behind the scenes before we bring the Form 3 to you to advertise, with Form 1 and Form 2 to get to the right number. This is, I think, very close, if not exactly where we will land here. And again, we're estimating this number high so that we're capturing all the potential expense that we might have here. Going back to that previous conversation, the increase in dollars is really talking about those here in dollars. The historical education to operations fund transfer. Again, a place where there's, I would say, a little bit of nuance this year potentially. We are approaching the point where we cannot put the education fund into the negative. And so we are getting close to the point where we're probably not going to be able to transfer the full 15% because we need to continue to fund those expenses that we have in the education. So in big picture, we have a cash balance in the operations fund, and it means you would be spending down that cash balance rather than transfer from ed to ops to cover those expenses.
And 15% is the limit.
15% is the limit, although penalty, as far as we know, it is.
You're on the naughty list, you have to put a statement on your website. And then you have to go and plan on how you're gonna get below that 15%. You know, when this occurred, when it started in 2020, that's when we shifted a lot of positions by state statute out of education fund into operations fund. So their additional expenses were moved to operations because of statute saying these are positions that can be paid out of education, and these are just not. So many positions in this building are paid for now out of operational, they used to be paid for out of it. Because they're not directly tied to instruction.
Although they are for document,
We would argue that, yeah.
Up for debate, but not.
not for.
But yeah, and those are these, from this previous slide, these are those positions. Okay. So circuit breaker impact, going back to Mr. Bowman's question and point on debt. There are districts who can pay for a lot of capital items out of their operations fund in Steve Wayne Township due to our circuit breaker impact. It's not one of them. $4.2 million doesn't cover our utilities and liability insurance for a given year, let alone buses, human resources, the business office, custodians, bus driver, the list goes on and on and on. And so obviously our referendum helps with that, and that transfer from ed to ops is what fills that gap. But it really puts us in a position where we have to leverage debt in order to maintain our facilities and the services that our community expects from us. While we're talking about that, and this morning you all had a little bit of a chance to hear this, of course, but these are real-time numbers. I pulled them just before came down today from our dashboard from Verigy. So lifetime, about $4.1 million in savings. And I think the big number to focus on is that trailing 12-month number of $1.162 million. So that means over the last 12 months, that is our savings. Think about the lifetime of that 4 million. Was it 2017, where we built that solar field? So you can start to see this holistic approach of energy management really started to save us dollars. That has about half of the batteries that we purchased and installed running at full capacity, and of course has none of the transportation solar farm there. So we're optimistic that we're going to be in that $2 million 12-month range, which again, kind of go back to Mr. Bowman's point, is going to put us in a financial situation where we have paid these things off well. well before we're, done gaining revenue from having those.
Memory does serve me correctly, and right now my memory is way off the deep end, but, we signed a contract to make a yearly, payment or a monthly payment on the lease. Some of that equipment out there. How much further do we have to go on that? Do you know?
Well, so we're still waiting on some rebates, potentially. We decided, so instead of leasing equipment, we went ahead and put it into bond issues. And they had a 12 to 15 year payback.
Couldn't remember which it was.
Yeah, 12 to 15 depending, but what we have seen is because of the increase, we're seeing it much shorter. And because of some of the rebates that we are expecting the government and hopefully we can sell our carbon credits at some point. Then we'll see a faster payout on that
Okay.
as well. We lucked out with our panels here that we bought them before we started to have some of the trade wars and things that were happening a couple of years ago.
Right.
Airport they were stored over at the airport, and we were very fortunate. We've had the panels for the transportation center for,
And for about 14 months in ours, yeah.
so, Verigy leveraging that for us ahead of time has definitely saved us some money. But it's about 12 to 15 years guaranteed for 25. So you have 10 years of nothing but return.
We don't have too much left then from that standpoint on those payments, if that's the case, because it goes back to Dennis.
Mhm.
And
We're 8 years in
at
on-
least 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, we're 8 years in on the panels that have been new.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right, that's what I'm, all right.
yeah.
That's just how that did.
Yeah, I just couldn't remember how long it had been. I know it's been a period of time, but I couldn't remember how long.
About 8 years that we've had that solar power Ben Davis somewhere.
Right.
And it's amazing how much the attitude of the utility companies has changed since we installed that solar array. And how much more cooperative they are than they once were. What we're able to do.
So this is the part where we shift into a little bit more of what's happening with SCA one and how does that impact our 26 budget? And then potentially just a few, points about how it might impact it beyond. And so this is something that you saw, Mrs. Herndon, talk us through with what's gonna happen to, our net assessed valuation as a result of Senate Enroll Act 1. So you can see that blue line is what we anticipated it would be with some continued growth over the next few years. And then that orange line is what it is with Senate Enroll Act 1. See the difference there? It does go down slightly until 2031, before it begins kind of that same track upward as it would have had after that, so previous to that legislation. So questions on this?
It's important to remember this is today. We still know there's additional reform coming. We just don't know what that's gonna look like. So these numbers are true today. We don't know what the next levers are gonna cause. There's a potential for a district like ours, high circuit breaker, low AV comparatively, that in the end, we will be benefactors because there will be a per people amount that goes to operations. That balances out high AV districts with low circuit breaker to low AV districts with high circuit breaker. And so if that ends up happening, woo-hoo, Wayne Township's a winner, right? So I think that's the end goal eventually, is to take away the disparities between communities. But I can guarantee 20 miles from here, they're gonna be screaming bloody murder when their revenues are dropped. Because they're not able to collect all of their AV.
There are different winners and losers in
Yes.
all scenarios.
Yeah. So that's a long-term goal, I think, where we're going, be interesting to see if we get there.
So then what does that mean? And also in the policy analytics presentation, you remember we talked a little bit about the levy strategy versus the rate strategy when it comes to debt and how that impacts. So that we had previously been on a levy strategy going back to Mr. Tackett and for that has shifted to a rate driven strategy which was allowing us to capture some of that increase in assessed valuation over the years. And that now with the Senate Enrolled Act 1, we really look at that as probably having to shift back to a levy-driven strategy in order to balance out our capital needs over the next 10 years. So what does that mean? So here we have what a operations net levy would look like. See those playing out there as a levy strategy on the left versus a rate strategy on the right. I think you can see based on these graphs why the rate strategy presents some serious questions and problems. So neither are fantastic, but continuing to lose dollars, rate driven strategy is something that we can't really afford to do. So what does that look like operationally? We mentioned earlier that we have an operating balance that helps us pay our debt. So as we, what we appropriate to pay out of debt is different than what we collect for property taxes. So our levy last year was about 43.2 million. We have looked at mostly plans to continue that, but you can see the appropriation for 26 is almost $47 million. So that gap between 43.2 and 46.9 is covered by the operating balance that we have in our debt fund as a district. So plenty of operating balance there to cover that, but obviously the more you spend, you know, it's not coming back, especially at the rate that it is with those pre-2014 50% operating balance loans that we have. So what does that mean for our operations fund? Because our debt fund, our debt levy is going to kind of disproportionately or inversely impact our operations collection from property tax. So Jane mentioned in the policy analytics presentation that we had asked them to run a current debt levy scenario, which is that 43.2 number, a $40 million debt levy scenario, and a $35 million debt levy scenario, so that we could see what impact that would have on our operations fund, dollars that we would be able to spend, you know, on an annual basis. So this conversation will continue, but I wanted to show you some of the graphs here that I did not put the $35 million levy on this graph, but we'll bring it to you in some other graphs. It is difficult, at least in a few years, it's not possible for us to get to 35 million because, as I mentioned earlier, our payments on debt we've issued prior to today exceed $35 million in certain years. So we can't get below there every year, but there's some give and some play that we can have that is going to generate a few more dollars in our operations fund, which when we look at the bottom line on a given year, is I think pretty significant for us to consider as long as we can continue to meet those capital needs. So the $40 million scenario, we can continue with the plan that we are in the process of approving with going into our second preliminary determination hearing in August. Carry all of that debt and at the end of that, right at or just below the 70-cent threshold, which is what the current statute says we have to be to issue additional debt after that. So those are the competing interests to think about there. But to be perfectly honest, the 1.7 million that we can approximately grab annually by reducing from our current debt levy of 43.2 million to 40 million, while still being able to meet our capital needs is significant. Think about where we're at on an annual basis. So we'll talk more about what that strategy looks like, but I want to introduce those concepts to you today. And then, of course, we know it's going to impact our operating referendum also. So this just gives you a picture of, we know that it's going to expire after 27. So lots of things to think about here. Part of what we look at in cash flow is these diminishing returns on that 35-cent referendum. And so in a slide or two here, we will talk a little bit more about new state law. We have to, if we pursue a referendum, we have to articulate a max levy and a max rate. And so we're really trying to predict in 7 years, what is the most dollars we would need to meet our responsibilities? And what rate do we think would correspond to the potential AV at that time in order to generate those tons? So it's a bit of a math problem. I think, and of course, you're putting that on the ballot, and those are, important things for taxpayers to consider when they're weighing in on that. It's to be quite an interesting, prediction for 7 years.
Are we still going to be adhering to state provided language for the ballot, or do we have the opportunity to write our own question?
So we really have two options. We can renew the referendum that we have, which basically decides the language for us. Or we can ask for a new referendum, which then falls into that levy rate, where we articulate what that would be at a max level, and then we can collect whatever the lower of those is.
Seems like the last election cycle, there were several school corporations that lost referendum opportunities because of a really poorly written question that was provided by the state. Is that right?
Yeah, the way the question is worded, I believe is better than it was, however, is still pretty challenging for public entities asking for additional tax. It paints the picture of how much you are raising taxes from what they would have been without it, and now adds in, if it's a renewal, how far their bill would go down if it didn't succeed or wasn't.
I would vote for it.
Right.
Not the way through. It's, so some strategic things to think about next spring. Currently, we believe every Marion County district, with the exception of Pike, which just went through a referendum, will be going in November 26th. We're hearing most, if not all, of Hamilton County will be going in November 26th. Haven't heard about Hendricks yet, or in some of the other surrounding counties, but there are a large number of districts that are caught in this time frame, because anyone who expires at 27 has to make a decision to go in 26 or delay it to 28, which means they'll go a year without that cash flow. So you're gonna see a lot of people trying to go in 26. A handful of districts, 5 maybe, are going in November of 25, paying for it themselves. Avon's one of those, so we'll keep an eye on that. If you were to go after a new referendum in 2026, then you could forego the 8th year of your current 2019 referendum and just not collect on it. Because the 2026 referendum would take place and start to be collected in 2027. However, if the referendum fails in November 2026, you still have another year in which you can collect on the current referendum before you have to determine the $20 million in reductions that'll have to happen as a result. So the strategy of going after a new referendum instead of a renewal gives you the option to have that last year as a buffer if you needed it of the 2019 referendum, or to let it just not collect on that because you're collecting on a new referendum past 26.
That will be very easy to communicate.
Right,
And how you say that.
right.
It's so hard to.
Well, one of the things that we're gonna try to do one of the things that we're gonna try to do in the next 5 months is have a bit of a plan together. Similar to the 2019 plan, we had some pretty draconian things we were communicating to people about what would happen if that second referendum didn't pass. We'd like to have something like that that we can present to the incoming superintendent and the board for consideration as talking points that have been developed by a large stakeholder group, that if the referendum doesn't pass, here are the reductions that have been identified moving forward. So having that plan very well thought out and well articulated is a goal of ours before the end of December. So, but take comfort that there will be a lot of districts will be going. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Change things.
I don't know if that's good or bad. I just don't know yet.
That doesn't make sense to me, that the
the goal was to get property taxes down, right? But yet now school districts, because they're not to be funded properly, are going to have referendums, which means taxes are gonna go up. That,
And residential property taxes really.
Then it's our fault, not theirs.
right, okay, got it.
And anyways, screw it.
Mhm.
I mean, it gives the local taxpayer choice. I think that they get to go to the polls, they get to determine whether or not they're gonna support their own local community. I think the other thing to remember as a board is, you're not raising anyone's taxes, you're giving the voter the opportunity to make a decision. And you're presenting them an opportunity to make a decision on whether or not they want to increase their own tax. You're not mandating, you don't have the authority to
No.
mandate a tax. So.
And just to Mr. Dave Marcotte's point, what that looks like, collecting on one referendum and not another, is really this budget process. We would just not levy anything for the referendum that we are not going to collect on, and then levy fully for the other one. And so it is a public process, but to your point, pretty complicated. And somebody has to be pretty tuned in to really know the mechanics of how that works.
This is so far fetched, but it would be amazing to have a large community who would come together. Just be able to look at the budgets. Okay, if you don't support this, show us where you want to cut 20 million.
That's right.
And those are good processes, but it ends up being the people who have the loudest voice that get hurt. Right?
Right.
And the people who don't have representation, or the program doesn't have representation, they end up getting cut. So I think that's the hard thing that administrators have to come up with the list, and we have to make decisions that community, that no one's going to like these cuts. So remember, we talked about it, keeping track of all those cuts, and it's hard. It's a hard process.
Yeah, I've been working on a facilitator who is not emotionally connected to the district. Somebody who knows and knows a little about school finance, to walk parents, students, community members, teachers, administrators through focus groups, through large group discussion, through developing one, the number that Steve's about to show you on the next slide, and what we need to do to shore up what exists today. Then two, what that would look like for the future referendum. So that you have the opportunity for people to have voice of choice. We can get beyond the first round of what the beehives, the garden and sell, sell honey to smokers. So those are the initial things that are coming out, but at some point we have to start talking about people programs. Because that's where people heavy industry, it's an area that's gonna have to be reduced. So what does that look like? What employee groups no longer exist or are greatly reduced? How do we make shifts? Are there programs that no longer exist? Are those kinds of things, those kinds of decisions? But ultimately, it's gonna be school board decision on approving the plan. The community comes up, I think, to Brandon's point, if you pull the curtain back and you show everybody, this is the reality of it. So let's sharpen our pencils and come up with where those efficiencies are gonna lie. And can lie over long term, because this is not gonna change in short. This will take a long time to recover.
Communication is going to have to be 5
Yes.
to election day.
Yes,
And it's very precise points.
well, and unfortunately, some of you are gonna be up for.
Not us.
The board.
Before.
It's board.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, referendum and school board election. Same
We would
time.
be there too, supporting.
Yeah, you'd be there to help you guys.
Oh, sure.
The presentation, 122, 134 slides.
It grew,
whatever
it grew.
We kind of kept growing, but I remember people crying,
Yeah,
and you were sharing about,
Yeah.
that's what have to be made, and it just, it was, I think people came in, it's like, oh, we can tweak this, we can tweak that, but when even employees were just like, well, but once they saw the reality, it was just like, oh my goodness, and you talked everywhere, and anywhere, any place that you want to respect the
a lot of presentation. That's right.
but So, but yeah, 'cause that's the only, if you don't get out there and present, you're gonna lose it, and you gotta go to every place. To share that message, because otherwise, the other message is gonna get shared, I'm gonna save $2.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so this is just a quick check-in. 6 months ago in January, we talked a little bit in more detail about finances and looked at this cash flow. And while 26 and beyond has changed now, and it's got some projections baked in from an enrollment perspective, for better or for worse, that $11.5 million in 2025, halfway there. Good news is our projections were pretty accurate. Bad news is the number that it is. So we submitted our Form 9 to the state and we're about negative 5.3. So, you multiply that by 2. You might say we were a little bit conservative, but we are heavier in our indirect cost reimbursement in first 6 months as we close out the school year from child nutrition. So I think we're gonna be right in that range where we projected as we sat here in January. For better for us. that event. So just this quick review, we took our administrators through this journey at the SIP meeting last week, but from 2021 to today, we know our enrollment was sitting at almost 17,000 and now we're at 15,800, at about $9,000 a kid. You can do the quick math on what that means for a bottom line. We had the ESSER funds, $50 million worth over a couple of years that we're no longer, they're gone. We spent those. There was some increased funding from the state during that stretch, and there was growing assessed valuation during that stretch. And then we also had for, part of that time through mid-2023, 2 referenda that were collected. So last year we collected, or this year we're collecting about $16 million. You multiply that by 2 because the referenda were the same 35-cent tax rate. Again, you start to see where we've been and where we are today. Just is what it is. We talked about those first 6 months of 2025, and then now we know that there is some current and future impact of Senate and Rollback 1. And so that's, I think, the goal today is to help connect some of these dots of where we are at, where we've been, and what we know the future may hold because of Senate Rollback 1. And so that commission that Dr. Butts talked about, really, what we're going to be looking for is $15 million. And as we go over the next few months, talking with you all about how we got to that number in a little bit more detail, what kind of goes into that, how did we arrive there, and where do we have the ability to find those, but also, we'll talk about the referendum, we'll talk about our operations rate, our debt rate, how do we align those to start to fill in that bucket as we move forward. So of course, negotiations, every other year become a huge piece of that list. And then last but not least, we've really kind of hit this conversation a little bit already, but just what we know from January 25 in that conversation, and looked at that cash flow, where we were, where we anticipated being, and now we know what Senate Rollback 1 probably looks like with some basic projection. So the work cut out for us is, what do we do with the referendum? What do we do with that operations and debt rate? And then, of course, enrollment is the underlying piece there. We've talked a little bit today, our kindergarten numbers are a little bit lower than we probably anticipated at the moment. And so things to continue to monitor, every 6 months, those ADM dates, what is our enrollment doing? Because enrollment is going to equal dollars. That's not going to change. And then the timeline, we mentioned this earlier, but very straightforward. August 11th, I would be asking for your approval of Form 3, so we could submit that to Gateway for advertisement. Come back in September with the public hearing that includes the budget, our bus replacement plan, our capital assets plan. That then, if approved, gets posted again, and then October 6th, after that has been posted for the articulated amount of time to bring the Form 4 for approval, that would then be officially submitted to the state, LGF review. Then that's sent to when you come back to us in December. That budget will be finalized. Questions, comments, concerns? Lots of. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Dr. Buss, do we have any additional board information or comments?
Well, Dr. Walsh has a birthday tomorrow.
I guess we sing it for both.
Happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday
to you.
Happy birthday to you.
I also, didn't know it until later on, but Brittany Cooler had a birthday today as well. So while we sang happy birthday to Emily, it's Brittany, there are probably others in the room too.
Pretty was the
Yeah. Great opening day. Thank you so much for being there, for all the support too. It's wonderful to have, it's always fun to have everybody perfect on everybody at the, in one place. And I think, overall our message was strong and hopefully got the day started off well for our families. Or for our teachers rather, who are getting ready to welcome both this afternoon and tomorrow, students and staff back. We are looking forward to having our students back on Wednesday, and you'll see, administrators are gonna be around, central office administrators will be around in all our different schools, so, and I will be welcoming the Wakefield kids back to the cloud. Just one now, yeah, that's right, yeah, one left. So, yes, I'm one of my, Jen has requested to, but, they get, I don't know, I'm here in the pictures, they have back to school pictures. I'll be doing that. Next week, we start straight A awards. Decided to kick those off, beginning on Tuesday. We'll have our drive-through straight A's as well. So just great to have students and staff back. It's what these buildings are made for. It's what it's what our jobs are for. And so we're just really excited to get everybody back in session.
It's always fun to think about kind of the roller coaster cycle of a school year. Just 6 weeks ago, as we were engaged in celebrations and had an opportunity to talk to teachers and administrators, everybody was really excited for that summer break and just to kind of recharge and refresh. Coming in this morning, I shared with the board, I got to kind of eavesdrop off of the conversation. I didn't hear a single person that wasn't excited to get back into a classroom and be with children. It was really good.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Anyone else? Right. We are adjourned at 8:17.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you wanna, you can just leave on the table.